Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. My name is Scott COVID Daly.
And I'm Matt Work Travel Freeman.
And with our powers combined, we are 8 days late with this week's episode. But most importantly, Matt, we're back. We didn't abandon the project just because I got sick and you had to go on an airplane.
Yeah, I think we can say this is maybe the only time we've failed to deliver reliable, hot, fresh content on the regularly scheduled date. So
that's true. And I think the lesson here is COVID is no joke, because I had a vaccine and a booster and it still put me on the floor for a few days.
What's funny, though, is I actually kind of feel like we almost still got it out, even with you having COVID.
We almost did.
It was actually the confluence of COVID plus me having work travel.
Yeah.
So it took basically two unprecedented interventions to keep us from you. So anyway, I'm just saying, back. Yeah, we're back. That's the important thing here.
Yeah.
Right?
And I feel like this happened at like the worst possible time in the book, where like the chapters we're talking about today are like major revelations of the entire story stuff. And we're just like, oh, we'll just take a week off and make Matt wait a whole nother 8 days before he can read any more of this book.
Yeah, totally. I totally enjoy doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think full disclosure for the folks at home, the episode was ready to go. Our prep was done. The script was done. I think the night before I actually tested positive, I was like, hey, Matt, my voice isn't feeling too up to it tonight. Can we do tomorrow? Thinking, oh, I'll be better tomorrow. It'll be fine. Then I woke up with a huge fever and coronavirus, as it turns out.
Uh-huh. So then we said, let's just let you sleep, buddy.
Yeah, which was honestly, like, if I hadn't taken the test, we probably still would have recorded, because that's how fucking terrible I am. But
yeah, right.
It was only having a positive test and allowing myself the excuse of, okay, I literally have this pandemic that shut the entire world down for 2 years.
Yeah.
So like I should take a break.
It's not like you specifically said, like, well, maybe we should try anyway, but I did sort of preempt you and was like, you should sleep.
And I did. Yeah. I slept a whole lot, and now I'm all better, and I'm so happy to be back here talking about Black House with you.
Me too.
This week on the show, Black House continues with chapters 19 through 21. As we said a couple seconds ago, pretty pivotal chapters in the overall story arc of this, especially coming from people doing a Dark Tower podcast, right?
Yeah. What's funny is that now we finally understand why we read The Talisman.
Yeah. Only 3 months later, we finally understand why we read The Talisman. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I did enjoy listening to you struggle through trying to get your head around why we would have read The Talisman in season 2. Like, you're like, well, I mean, like, it's Dark Tower adjacent. Like, I get it. Like, The Talisman is the Tower. I get it. But it was so far off from everything else we've covered on the season so far. And the whole reason was because we had to cover this book, and you have to read that book before reading this one.
That's so funny. But yeah, I'm glad we covered all that too. Obviously, it was fun.
Yeah, of course. So this week, the Thunder Five attempts to reach the Black House, and it does not go well. Meanwhile, Jack heads back to the territories, and it's a bunch of exposition again. We get the old Stephen King exposition chapter, where we finally 3/4 of the way through the book figure out the deeper, larger story behind everything that's happening.
Yeah, we sure do.
And we're going to have so many thoughts about that and more. And I don't want to waste any further time because I've been waiting an extra week to talk to you about this. So I just want to get into it.
Sounds good.
Before we do that, though, we did have one quick announcement. Tomorrow, or today, as you are listening to this, the 24th of June, we are going to be doing our monthly book club on that book we mentioned at the beginning of the month. We Have Always Lived in the Castle. We'll be over on our YouTube channel live at 9:30 p.m. Central Time to talk about that book for a little over an hour. So I recommend you come hang out with us, because it's going to be a good time. And I think both of us are kind of itching to talk about things again. So I'm very excited we get 2 in a row. We get to do this tonight, and tomorrow we get to talk about a book.
Yeah. And it's funny that We've Always Lived in the Castle is like a 5-hour audiobook.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible that even if you hadn't read it,
you could wake up tomorrow, pop that sucker in, and be ready to go.
Yeah. Catch us by What time?
Whatever. 9:30 p.m.
9:30
Central
p.m.
Time.
Central Time. That's right.
We take 1 week off and you don't know anything anymore.
That's right. Yeah, it is going to be rough getting back to this.
All right, Matt, let's begin with our first chapter of the week, chapter 19. We pick up with the Thunder Five as they set out to look for the Black House. We, of course, know that things are not going to go well for Beezer and his Tet, but I wanted to focus on how this is set up first at the moment, because we spend some time here at the very beginning of this chapter noting specifically that the Thunder Five don't really experience fear the way the rest of us do. I love this line here. For those of us who are not members of a biker gang or the Marine Corps, solidarity means little more than the compassionate impulse that leads us to comfort a bereft friend. For Beezer and his merry band, solidarity is the assurance that someone's always got your back. They are on each other's hands, and they know it. For the Thunder Five, safety really is in numbers, which is all kind of a beautiful setup into how terrible all this stuff is going to go. But I found that very specifically interesting in that, like, we've built these five up as distinct from other groups.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because it felt like a really different kind of fresh take on the idea of a quartet as a concept. Mm-hmm. It's this very frank and explicit look at the idea of a group of men who are something, as he compares it between a military unit and, group of drinking buds, mm-hmm. and how they sort of subsume their identity into that of the group, the Thunder Five, the collective. There's stuff this week, for example, about things feeling off when Beezer isn't in the lead of the pack, which kind of reminds me of the concept of Roland as the din of the quartet. Clearly, there's nothing explicitly magical about the biker gang, but also you see all sorts of parallels to the idea of the quartet, at least at first.
No, I think you're right on there for sure. I also love the way, like, we'll talk about this in a bit, but I love the idea of solidarity and safety in numbers, that the strength of these people is in their community with each other, and the way the chapter as it doles out kind of isolates them is really, really great.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of by emphasizing, like you said, by emphasizing that they are a unit and then sort of trying to break them apart and drive a wedge between them, that really provides us with a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. So our bikers drive along 35 looking for either the no trespassing sign or any other indication of the road to the Black House. And we see at first that they just can't seem to find it. This is, I think, the first way our group solidarity is threatened in this book. And I love the way kind of King and Straub kind of systematically dismantle this, because we do kind of in this moment see them turn angry with each other. Like, particularly we're with Sonny for most of this, one of the members, who is the one that will eventually find the road. He in this moment gets really angry and frustrated with Mouse for just either making all this shit up or misremembering. He's kind of playing it off as, oh, you were on the ultra acid and you're just misremembering what happened. And it's like, it seems like we got this like group that is not the solid unit as we've been told it is, but kind of like a herd of pissed off sheep that Beezer is like really trying to wrangle as much as he can, and it's not working too well here in the beginning. Yeah,
exactly. There's this definite vibe of things being off kilter, and the rhythm is off, and I think the vibe that I got from all of that is like, it's because this has been sort of magically tampered with.
Sure.
And that's the fun thing. I said a second ago that there's nothing overtly magical about the quartet of the biker gang. But at the same time, I think that in the Stephen King cosmology, every quartet has a kind of magic to it.
Yeah. Whether it's explicit or not, I think you're right.
Yeah. And maybe, and I think there's something magic about, the relationships between human beings. Like, there's something of the white in every close friendship, and there's something of the white in every band of honorable comrades. And so even though it's not that they don't have telepathy, they don't magically speak the same language, there is a kind of magic to their solidarity. And no, totally. Cool. One other interesting thing I think that's worth talking about here, Matt, is in this moment as they're kind of searching for the Black House, Sonny randomly starts being reminded of a place called Harco, which is a small off-the-map town in Illinois that he and a couple of his high school buddies stumbled upon
when they went on a post-graduation road trip on their bikes. And we see here that they kind of stayed the night in the abandoned motel in the middle of town, and everything just kind of felt wrong. And so Sonny kind of walks out in the middle of the night, not sleeping there, decides to go sleep out under the stars. And when he wakes up the next morning, looks into the hotel room, he sees that one of his friends has fucking decapitated his other friend. And so this place of evil, like of utmost evil here, that just like it's kind of almost jarring how casually Sonny's memory just brings up this tale of this horrible thing that happened to him, that obviously has some not as you said, not explicitly like sinister in a like magical kind of way, but also something just beyond. Like, there's no indication that there was anything wrong with this person before he just randomly in the middle of the night chopped his buddy's head off.
Yeah. Well, it's a demon house. There's
of course
so many demon houses in this story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's first of all, there's a motif I think that bleeds across this week of reading, maybe even last week too, where we have Mouse's story, we have multiple sidebars from other characters flashing back to their own lives and their own sort of traumatic experiences.
Yeah, I mean, Doc will have a similar one here in a few minutes too.
Exactly. And so like this part of the book is almost a little short story anthology, call it macabre tales from the road. It's our little anthology of side stories about the Thunder Five within this novel. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, by the way. Like, I really enjoyed, even if it was a sort of break in the flow of the story, I didn't care at all because I was really into each of these, I don't know, side story, parenthetical story, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. And I think, we'll talk about this when we get to Doc's story a little bit more, but how they all center around death, right? Like, these are men who have kind of come together, and they all have this story in their past of this horrible incident around death. And that seems to be indicating something.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to hit on related to Harco is, like, it really, for some reason, got me thinking, well, not for some reason, for an obvious reason, got me thinking about Salem's Lot and One for the Road.
Yes.
Which are these stories about this town that gets eaten by vampires, and then henceforth it's just kind of this place on the map between other places where you don't go that way, nobody talks about it. It's a borderland place, or it becomes a borderland place anyway.
This is another one of those things that strikes me as not specifically American, because there are ghost towns, in plenty of other countries, but like, I don't know, just in this instance of it, it's very American. This idea of this town existed and then was abandoned, and then it just sits there, and maybe nobody will ever build here again for the rest of forever, and it will just be this town that sits there until it just collapses and breaks down. And of course, King has infused the magical into that by, in the case of Salem's Lot, being vampires that responsible for the thing that killed the town, and Harco, God knows what else. But yeah, just this evil that exists in places in the country that just kind of land there, consume it, and then just sit there and leave it to rot until some poor bikers wander in unsuspectingly and experience that evil. I mean, we know that for a fact because our character's about to walk down the road towards Black House and experience this very present, very real, very strong evil that we've seen other places. One of the things that it got me thinking about was that time when Wolf was running around, and he smelled out, some of the old places, back in the Talisman. These are places where we won't do any killing. It's an old place. They're just places of power that exist in the world that are just out there. And sometimes they're places of power for good, and sometimes it's for bad. And that's the Black House, and that's Harco, and that's time and time again. These places exist.
Yeah, I almost forgot about that, but that's a great pull because, I don't know, it just completes the picture in a way. I like that.
Mm-hmm. So finally, Sonny catches a glimpse of the small piece of the white no trespassing sign. And I like this map because it's while he's kind of journeying back into his time at Harco and the way that made him feel in that experience. It's during that specific time that he catches sign of the no trespassing sign, just a little tiny blip of white as he drives by. And it means suggest that like it was the remembrance of this evil, this horror that he experienced in Harco that perhaps attuned him to the evil that the Black House is putting on, and therefore allowed him to get that glimpse of that sign. There's nothing textually in the book that says that, but I feel like that's what it's kind of laying down there. What do you think?
Yeah, I got that impression.
Okay.
I think that it was his prior proximity to evil that had kind of pulled out this insight here, or this attunement, maybe, or maybe even just open-mindedness to the idea of the supernatural or the idea of evil in general. That was my feeling. Also, just as an aside, like Jack should have given them some kind of warning that they were going to encounter something otherworldly.
Yeah, I mean, he probably. I agree with you, but I also think like there's no way he knew the level at which they were about to get themselves into specific forces of power, right? Like maybe he thought, oh, this could be bad and there might be some metaphysical stuff going on, but certainly not a real and present dangerous evil like they experience. I don't know.
That's true. I think, I guess you could fairly say where his headspace is right now. He's trying to avoid getting other people roped into his, otherworldly business.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was fun. I think the reason I say that is like in retrospect, it's almost comic how unprepared they are for what they're walking into. And part of you feels like even if he had just framed it as like, there's something weird going on. I don't know. That's the other part of it. That's the other part of it is like, what could he have said? It's back to our conversation from Salem's Lot.
Yep.
What could he have actually said that wouldn't have made them just be like, oh, so Jack Hollywood is crazy.
Yeah.
And we should ignore him. And like, you can't really prepare someone for that kind of thing. So I guess never mind then.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a threshold to be crossed when you say the word vampire or when you say demon house, or like it's one thing to know these things are going on and having people circle around your orbit trying to help you. It's another to just come right out and say them. And I think King and Straub realize that a little bit, and that's why we have these characters experience this stuff. And there's no kind of arguing or back and forth about, oh, you're crazy, Jack, I don't believe you. We just kind of get right to it here.
Yeah, I think ultimately this is probably the right way to do this.
Mm-hmm. All right, so they're going in, Matt, and here's you hit on this before, but this line here is because Mouse has been here before. He goes on point. Doc and I'll be right behind with Sonny and the Kaiser covering our asses. Beezer glances at them and says, "Stay about 6-8 feet back, all right? Don't put Mouse on point. You have to go in first," speaks in Sonny's mind. But he says, "All right, Bees." And I think this is important to think about because, you talked about how they are a unit and how Beezer is kind of the leader of the quartet. He is the din. And I like this a lot because like there's something otherworldly talking to Sonny right now saying, no, this is wrong. We don't go in this way. We go in this way with the most powerful one of us first. And I think that is really a thing that is true and really interesting in the world of Stephen King, right? Like, this is not a story in which, everyone's equal and nobody's special, right? This is a story in which people are special. People are better. People like Jack exist in this world. Jack is just textually better than everyone else around him, which doesn't mean he doesn't need those people around him. The books have shown again and again how he does need them, but he's Jack. He's better. And once again, we have this thing where Beezer is the best of them, the most powerful of them, the leader of them. And perhaps if Beezer had been at the head of the point as they drove down this road towards Black House, it would not have gone quite as badly as it does here.
I almost feel like this is a setup for a subsequent scene where the Thunder Five do operate as a unit the way they're meant to, and then they just turn into incredible badasses. But like by first showing like what happens when they're kind of in disarray and not really prepared, that makes it a little bit more dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thought for sure.
We'll see.
So the gang drives towards Black House, and for the next few pages, we'll see the events of their first journey down Black House Lane, which, as we said, does not go well. I don't think there's a lot to talk about here, Matt, as far as the actual events. Like the basic gist is everything goes bad. Everyone starts immediately hurting, bleeding, having trouble seeing, remembering horrible events from their past. There's suddenly like big giant dog monsters who seem immune to bullets. One of them bites Mouse on the leg. The main point here, the main gist of this is the house seems to be actively working towards not being found, like not only by hiding itself, but actively pushing back against anyone who dares even get close to them. What do you think? So before we get into like kind of the analysis, what do you think about the overall horror show that is the Thunder Five's Black House entrance attempts?
Yeah, so I like it a lot overall. Yeah, in fact, I think I simply enjoy it. It's an action sequence. It's a damn fun action sequence. I love how it switches between perspectives as we go in. I love how much we learn about each of the Thunder Five organically through the course of the action and how they choose to react. Like I think I got a much clearer picture of who they are as individuals through this. And like I said earlier, I liked how we sort of, for most if not all of them, actually, we get a little flashback. I think it's only Kaiser that we don't get a flashback for, if I recall.
Correct. Yeah. Because he just is immediately knocked out. So there's nothing going on in that brain when you're unconscious.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
But I think you've cued upon the part of this that I find the most interesting, because I agree with you. The thing that I enjoy the most is how this whole thing is structured, because it's not just we have all five of our guys drive down the road and they experience things and then the scene ends and we move on. We see these events play out from each of the individual Thunder Five's perspective, or like you said, at least four of the five. It's a fun, really interesting technique that, as you said, I think really allows you to understand who these people are more than you have before, because we focus in on each of them and we live with each of them. But like, to me, I think it is doing something rather special on top of that. And I think this speaks to the genius of Stephen King and Peter Straub here. We talked at the beginning of the chapter how solidarity is the name of the game here, how the Thunder Five operate as a unit, and they are not afraid of most things because they have strength in numbers. They are a unit. They are, a wedge with Beezer at the lead, kind of driving into any problem that they can solve. Strength in numbers, right? But when we watch them fail here, we watch them all fail individually. It's not as a unit. It is not the Thunder Five experiencing what happens when you get close to the Black House. It is Beezer experiencing it. It is Doc experiencing it. It is Sonny experiencing it. It is Mouse experiencing it. Because we get these little mini vignettes from each of their perspective, it separates them. It segments them. It individualizes them. It removes their solidarity. It removes them existing as a unit. And we see that in that way, a different thing happens to each of them, right? It is not just one thing happens to all of them. Beezer goes almost blind. Doc's head and arm gets so heavy he can barely move them, and then his hearing goes completely away. Mouse feels like he's being choked to death by little Nancy, the woman that died on the bike. Sonny gets severe stomach pains and headaches, and Kaiser just like pours blood from his nose and mouth until he just passes out, right? So these events are all different. They're all individual. They're all unique. There's no solidarity. There's no quartet here, and it's like kind of a perfect way of structurally representing exactly what you're trying to do narratively, I think, and I love it so much.
Yeah, nothing really to add there. I agree. I mean, I guess the one thing to add is just the mere fact that they go in a line is a kind of visual shorthand for taking this group where their strength is in their unity and solidarity and literally stringing them out so that they can kind of be picked off one by one by the evil of this place. And there's one of their buddies in front and one of them behind, but effectively they're surrounded by the forest, which I don't know if it's like the forest or the house or what, it doesn't really matter, but but they're exposed is the point.
Yeah, and I love the note where Sonny thinks about not putting Mouse on point, one of the things Beezer says is stay about 6-8 feet back, which, I think is sensible when you're riding on motorcycles. You don't want to crash over each other, but also that you're spacing them out. You're separating. There's separation there. And I think that's all part of how the house wins in this part.
I think you're totally right. Yeah. I mean, one thing I was thinking about is from a plot narrative point of view, is this a test that they fail, or is this a test that they succeed? And I guess I'd come down on the side of they succeed. I think,
well, they're not dead, so that's something. They're
not dead. The house, the evil tried to break them and certainly tested them. And, it caused these breaks in kind of their organization. Like there was kind of conflict over who was going to lead and difficulty finding the sign. And you're worried, like, are they going to be able to fight the evil? Are they going to be able to band together? And then ultimately they do pull together, and they just barely do, though. Like it seems really close. Like a couple of them are able to get their hands on their guns. One of them is already down with the dog biting him. Like I don't know. Like overall, it just was a wonderfully crafted sort of story moment of like, oh man, like they almost broke, and if they had broken, they would all probably be dead, like you said.
Yeah, but I think it is worth noting that they leave with one of their member injured, right?
Yeah.
Mouse has been bit by evil demon dog and does not seem to be doing okay. We don't know the resolution of that, because from here we move on to Jack and his adventures, and we don't get to pick up with the Thunder Five until next week, I guess, unless I get COVID again. But I mean, you're right that they survived this, but one of their members does leave not doing well.
Yeah. Did you make anything of the fact that Kaiser doesn't get a moment in the sun?
No, I mean, I think this is one of those things that might just be like the simplest answer is the most correct one, where they just felt like 5 was too many different ways of telling the same events over and over again, and so they just had to take one piece off the board and just say 5 feels like too many. We can do 4, or maybe they just are saving Kaiser stuff for later.
I lean toward it would have slowed things down too much. But you're right. Maybe, I mean, one thought I had, I was like feeling real paranoid. I was like, what if Kaiser's like got some horrible dark secret and that we're going to find out later. And like, that's why we don't get to see what he's struggling with, because it's like something that will kind of matter later. But that's sort of half a prediction, half of a paranoid delusion. There you go.
I mean, it's so funny because like doing the show is like, some people listen to you say these things and they're like, what are you on? But I think it's just like doing this show kind of forces you to try to wrestle with it in that way of saying, "Ooh, something must be happening here. So you must be doing something with this specific thing." And by the way, I'm not saying whether you're right or wrong. It's just I enjoy it very much.
Yeah, you can't stop me anyway. So.
It's also worth noting here that during his section of this part, Doc remembers the time that he accidentally killed someone during his residency. When Jack talked to him about why he didn't become a doctor, he didn't tell the full story, it seems. Like he was a little bit tired and he miscalculated the dosage of some medicine, and it killed someone. And again, this is what we go back to what we talked about before. Each of the Thunder Five has a death in their past, some direct experience with death that have kind of led them to this part. Sonny has his high school beheaded friend. Mouse has little Nancy. Doc has this accidental death, and now Beezer has his daughter. We don't know much about Beezer's past yet, but we do know that like he is the member that has lost a daughter to the fisherman here. And as you mentioned before, Kaiser is still a big question mark. We just don't know.
Yeah, something horrible, no doubt. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree. You pointed out it feels very intentional. I feel like on the higher, Dark Tower level of things, that these guys are all warriors of the white who have brushed up against evil and then found each other and thereby found the strength to push back against the Abala.
Sure. No, I like that. So as we said, the Thunder Five managed to fight off the evil monster dog and escape back down the road into the safety of Beezer's place. We leave them behind for the rest of this week's reading with Mouse bit and seriously injured, but still alive. So fingers crossed that everything works out for the Thunder Five.
Yeah,
we'll find out. We'll find out in a few days.
Yep.
All right, move on to chapter 20. Has us heading back to Jack as he makes his way back to Arden and Judy Marshall. Fred calls Jack from the road, saying that the fisherman sent Judy a tape at Ward D, and that the tape has kind of set her off and caused her to kind of resume her insanity. Man, what do you think about this whole, let's just give a mental health patient a tape from that we haven't listened to first?
Just a perfect story touch. Just giving her the tape, like, I don't know. It's just darkly funny is what it is. It's like, well, you can almost imagine the authors being like, how are we going to get the tape to her? Like, oh, they just give it to her because they're incompetent. Yeah. That's what would actually happen. Yeah.
No, yeah, you're right. Completely believable. But it's just like, oh, geez, guys. I one of the things this made me think of, and I'm not even sure I'm 100% right about this, so feel free to correct me, but it strikes me how often in this book we are told that Judy has like officially gone off the deep end. And then whenever our character, being Jack in this case, sees her, she's doing fine, right? Like, there are 2 times where we're told that, oh, we can't go out there right now because she's really lost it. She's really, really lost it. And then every time Jack sees her, she's totally calm, totally collected, totally herself, totally understanding of what needs to be done and what's going to happen here. It really strikes me that, like, with the exception of, I guess, the first moments of Judy realizing that the tie has been taken, we haven't actually seen any of her action. Like, even when Fred gets home, he sees the result of Judy's insanity. He doesn't actually see the insanity itself.
It's a really good point. Yeah, I don't know what exactly to make of that.
By the way, I don't either. It's just something that occurred to me on this reread.
No, it's funny because as you were talking, I was going to be like, well, we did see her go crazy initially, but you're right that we kind of cut away from that, and then when Fred does get to her, she's kind of on the tail end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe you could just kind of say that Jack's proximity to her brings her a kind of healing, something along those lines.
Well, and because we're in Jack's point of view so much, and Jack can't see her that way, I don't think he has the capability of seeing her that way. So, just because he's in love with her.
Yep.
Speaking of which, I really like this moment early in this chapter where Fred says, oh, you need to come up to the hospital to check on her again. And Jack's like, oh, I was already on my way there. And Fred is like, wait, without me? Why? To which Jack, of course, immediately lies, right? Like, which is really interesting because up until this point, he's been pretty straight with Fred, even coming so far as to say, like, yes, there's a magical world that exists out there, and that's where your son is, and I'm going to help her get him from there. We've been joking around about this. Is Jack going to really try and bang this married woman thing? But I love that this kind of at least introduces the idea of him being aware that the feeling he has is wrong here. Like that's why he lies to Fred, that like he's uncomfortable with the way he feels. I don't know. It's just, it cracked me up.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I don't think I was necessarily even joking about the idea that he wanted to bang the married woman, because it seemed obvious that there was going to be some kind of movement on this romance axis, because the idea was introduced and then it kind of was sustained as a background thing, and you're like, oh shit, where's this going exactly? I think I had guessed, I don't know if I said this on the show or not, but at least in my brain I had guessed that like he wasn't seeing Judy's true beauty, he was seeing Judy's twinner's beauty. But for some reason, I just didn't make the jump to, well, he's gonna fall in love with and get with Judy's twinner.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed like a pretty obvious place to go, actually, in retrospect. But I didn't see it. Oh well.
Well, that's where we are. So you were just there. You're just so close, Matt. So close.
I know.
I really love the writing here. Worlds spin around him, worlds within worlds, and other worlds alongside them, separated by a thin membrane composed of thousand doors. If only you know how to find them. 1,000 red feathers, tiny ones, feathers from a robin redbreast, hundreds of robin redbreasts, flew through one of those doors, Speedy's. Robin, as in robin's egg blue. Thank you, Speedy. And as the song said, wake up, you sleepyhead. I just love that writing. Like he's fully into it. The idea of worlds about worlds spinning around him. This very remnant of the time he first touched the talisman to me.
Yeah, I agree. I like it. It's magical.
And as these worlds are spinning around him, Jack comes to a conclusion. He says it's all about twinners, of course. He says Judy Marshall's twinner is a key to this. The fisherman must have a twinner as well. It's all about twinners. And I find this really fascinating because the book goes on later in these next chapters to basically say, no, Jack, you don't quite have it. That's wrong, actually. And I think this is really interesting because we've talked before about when Stephen King normally does the character has an important revelation using their mind powers about what this all means and what it's going to, that character is usually correct, right? He doesn't very often have a person like make this kind of extrasensory conclusion about something and then have them just be like, no, you didn't quite have the mark there. But he does it here, and I think it's interesting.
Yeah, you're right. Usually, I think we said before, like sometimes when the text tells you something is just this way, then you should just usually be like, yeah, okay. Unless you're in a story that's all about having like an unreliable narrator. The book certainly did seem to be nudging us in the direction of, it's twinners, it's flipping, it's all the territory shit that we're used to. And then after leading us to believe that, and even having Jack decide that is what it is, and sort of letting us feel like, yeah, okay, we got this. Then the book is like, nope, it's actually Dark Tower shit, not territory shit.
Yep, of course. The thing you didn't see coming, the big tower looming in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So as Jack gets to the hospital, he finds that he's unable to immediately go back to see Judy. And there's this extended bit that we go through with this head guard of Ward D who does not like Jack and does not want Jack to go in. And this escalates to the point where the kid eventually brings up Kinderling, the man that Jack found guilty of murder, echoing the same sentiment that Kinderling's wife did last week, that he's innocent and Jack set him up. And I think this is really a really interesting thing we do here. And I kind of want to get your take on, why we're doing this specifically here.
Yeah, well, definitely it makes more sense that we brought up the idea previously that there was some bad blood over his arrest of the other murderer to set up this moment, which then hilariously culminates in Wendell getting sucked into Midworld. But I think maybe more the direction your question is pointed is like, why introduce this idea of like people being resentful of Jack for doing the right thing? And I don't know, like, so it's interesting because I don't remember anything like this specifically being in the other book. Although now I'm kind of thinking and wondering if maybe there were some examples. I mean, he was clearly running across people all the time who were just horrible people, and he was trying to either defy them or escape them or whatever.
Yeah.
And they were the antagonists. So maybe in some greater sense, it's like how the world is kind of always set against you, or the darkness in the world is always set against you if you're going to be a gunslinger.
You're heading right where I wanted to go with this, so that's perfect. Yeah, this is the reason I brought this up is because I think it's very interesting that we've kind of established in this world that Jack is kind of this shining beacon of a person, right? Where a lot of people see Jack in the exact same way Jack sees Judy, where they look at him and they see someone who's beautiful, right? That was a refrain we saw echoed a lot in the Talisman. This beautiful man, and people just kind of fall in love with him, and they can't help but want to be surrounded by him. He's this beacon for a lot of people. But I think it's important to say that not for everyone, right? Because this kid doesn't like him very much. Wendell doesn't like him very much. So it's this interesting thing, and I think this happens a lot in Stephen King stories. That we have these characters that are like these kind of just better and above other people type characters, and decent everyday folk will look at that person and be kind of enraptured by them. But people carrying darkness tend to immediately begin to hate that person and grow resentful of that person and want to take that person down a peg if they can. And it's this really fascinating viewpoint in my mind of what are these warriors of the white, as you put it. What do they have to live with in this world? They're either, obsessively loved by decent people or immediately despised by the people not quite so decent.
Yeah. That's by setting yourself against evil. I think you're setting yourself against all these sorts of people. I think Wendell's a great example because he's not the same sort of monster as we sometimes get. Like, we definitely hate him, and he sucks, and he does lots of immoral and objectionable things, but he hasn't like crossed that line into being a monster. So it's interesting to me how he never liked Jack, right? Mm-hmm. So he seems to be somebody who has darkness within him, but it's like, well, I'm losing focus here. I think I'm just really interested in the idea of Wendell because I really thought I knew what direction we were going with his character. And as we're going to see, I think the story is going to be pulling him in a very different direction than what I was expecting. And I'm very excited to see where we go with that, because that's an interesting way of exploring this idea of good men and men with darkness in their hearts. I don't know. Did you have any more thoughts on this idea?
No, I mean, I like what you said about Wendell and, the book maybe doing different stuff with him than we were thinking, right? Because once again, for the third time in as many weeks, we have Wendell, plotting to do something insidious and terrible, and it's foiled, but once again, not quite in the way anyone expected it to be foiled, right? I don't think you ever would have predicted, oh, well, Jack's going to pop over into Midworld and Wendell fucking Greene is going to come with him on the ride. So it is interesting the ways in which we keep kind of subverting expectations when it comes to Wendell's meddling in everyone's affairs.
Yeah, because I think my expectation was that it would just push him until he went from like, okay, I'm gonna sneak where I shouldn't be and take pictures of something I shouldn't take pictures of, to like, I'm gonna blow up somebody's car or something, like because I always go into I think it's somehow foundational that the first King book I read was Needful Things, because part of me always expects things to culminate in people with kitchen knives in the street. And I kind of thought we were going in that direction with Wendell, but it seems like it's going to be something interesting and different.
Yeah, I mean, I reserve the right to say we could still go that way, but I think you're right that like one thing we don't know leaving this week's reading is what this experience is going to do to him, because whatever he was expecting to happen in that room, this certainly wasn't it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
speaking of the fucker, Wendell fucking Greene walks into this tension between Jack and this security guard for Ward D. And we see here again that we have another reason to hate Wendell, right? Because he called up Fred Marshall earlier, and Fred, in his unwise choice making, decides to kind of reveal just about everything to Wendell about what's going on, about how Jack is helping. The only thing he doesn't talk about is the only thing that Wendell finds out about later, which is the other world shit, right?
Yeah. No, it's you feel for Fred, because
mm-hmm.
I don't know. I feel like I can be bamboozled into situations like that by a clever con artist myself.
Well, let me tell you about how effective salesmen that come to my front door in the middle of the day are in making me do things I don't want to do.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do this, but it's just like, well, we've got an appointment to do a quote for replacing our windows, even though we can't afford to do that right now. How did that happen? How did I let that happen? It's so, yeah, I mean, I totally understand the ability of very forceful, very persuasive people can get you to reveal stuff that you fully did not plan to do it. So yeah, I feel bad for him here too.
Can I share with you a trick that I figured out?
Oh, please do. Please do.
When they come to your door, very often the first question they'll ask is, "Hi, are you the homeowner?" And then you just say, "No."
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
And whether or not you are, and if they don't ask, then just say like, I'm not the homeowner. I can't really.
Yeah, we're renting.
I can't really do that thing, that whatever it is, the windows or the solar panels or whatever. And then they'll just leave, because that actually serves as a functional deterrent. So.
I think that what they're doing is they're using the idea of a person, like they're using the whole concept of not taking no for an answer against people, right? Like, because you're very used to in most situations you have in life, if someone says, "Hey, do you want this thing?" and you go, "No," and then that's the end of the transaction.
Right.
You don't want, and they're like, "Oh, okay. However, you sure you don't want the thing?" And you're, and I think I'm just so discombobulated by the whole thing. Like, wait, but I already said no. Maybe I do. Wait, no, huh? And then just like it kind of throws you off your game a little bit.
Well, they create a frame where it would obviously be rude for me to just shut the door in their face.
Yes.
But that's
all I want to do.
Yeah, and that's kind of the only move they've left me through their maneuvering. Anyway, the trick is one good out though.
I will use that. But by the way, I never actually did get the quote on my windows, because they said they would come by at 4 p.m. the next day, and then they called at 6 and were like, "Hey, can we come?" And I was like, "No." Nope. It's 2 hours after you said you were going to. I'm putting my son to bed, and I can handle this over the phone. By the way, I'm very good at over the phone. It's just in person that I can't handle it.
Yeah, because even if you shut the door in their face, you've just got a person standing on your doorstep whose door you just shut in their face. Yeah.
Well, that was a classic Kingslingers digression, but somewhat relevant, because obviously Wendell Greene is a window and trim salesman and a reporter.
Yeah, that's totally see how we got here. Yeah.
So Jack manages to speak with Dr. Spiegelman, who he is able to convince to give Jack and Judy 30 minutes completely alone in his office to speak about what's been troubling her, and also flip into the territories.
30 minutes. Wow.
That's a long time for what they're going to do.
Yeah. That's a Ward reference, by the way. I can't believe that there's a Ward reference in Black House.
Yeah, it's so weird how that happened that way. Nobody knows what you're I'm going to be honest with you. I barely remember what you're talking about.
You do, though.
But barely.
Some fraction of... It's exactly what it sounds like, folks. 30 minutes. 30-minute allotment for doing your business. Which is a euphemism.
We got it, Matt. Everyone knows.
Okay. Good.
Wendell, for his part, manages to convince the annoying guard Ethan Evans, what a name, to let him sneak into the closet in that same office and listen in on their conversation. And yeah, like we said about before, this is another uh-oh moment, right? Where we're like, oh no, here's Wendell again. He's gonna do something. He's gonna get pictures of Jack planting evidence. Oh no, then he's going to rile up the crowd and make everything boil over. And then here, oh no, he's going to catch them talking about crazy stuff and get Jack committed. Another moment. And of course, as we already talked about, it just doesn't go that way.
Yeah. I thought this was going to be it. I thought this was going to be the moment where Wendell finally gets the raw evidence that he needs to totally fuck over Jack. And of course, it wasn't going to be them boning down. It was going to be like physical evidence that Jack knows about other dimensions, or a recording of Jack sounding like a lunatic talking about other dimensions.
Yeah.
Either way, it would have been damning and destructive. But yeah, like you said, my expectations are pleasantly subverted.
Yeah. So the doctor, as he's leading him to his office, confronts Jack directly about the idea that the fisherman comes from another world. And Jack does some really good old-fashioned not lying here, where he says, "Do you think this monster inhabits the same universe that we do?" asks Jack. "I don't, and neither do you. The fisherman lives in a world all his own, one that operates accordingly to fantastically detailed rules he has made up or invented over the years. With all due respect, my experience has made me far more familiar with structures like this than the marshals, the police, and unless you have done a great deal of work with psychopathic criminals, even you. I'm sorry if that sounds arrogant, because I don't mean it that way. So the whole I'm not lying, but I am a little bit here thing.
Yeah, from a certain point of view.
Yeah. No, Matt, haven't you watched Obi-Wan? We fixed that.
Oh,
We fixed that whole thing.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, very weaselly of Jack here, actually. It's kind of funny because it's always funny to me when Jack lies. I get that you have to lie as a detective. Part of being a detective is, it's funny. Like we were just talking about the door-to-door salesman having a repertoire of tricks for kind of cornering you. That's what detectives have to do a lot. It's just funny when Jack does it because I see him as being such a like noble kind of, knightly figure.
Yeah.
That seeing him lie, it kind of feels almost wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right, because that's kind of, Jack has kind of operated outside the bounds for most of the book, right? Like the entire reason why Wendell Greene might have gotten a picture of Jack planting evidence at a crime scene is because Jack was planting evidence at a crime scene, right? And so like he is not, at least the way the book is constructing him, a beacon of law and order as it exists in our world. He is kind of a thing that is, we're being told, is operating above it, which fits into a lot of the very standard detective tropes of we kind of talked about this before. The detective has to solve the case and he can't let the law get in the way of solving the case. But also it operates on this: Jack is just a better and so he doesn't operate according to the morals and the principles that you would expect one to. So like the book does not have any qualms with Jack lying, I think, is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, it's really interesting to reflect on the idea that Wendell has mainly cropped up in the story in specifically moments where Jack is kind of doing something a little duplicitous. And it's almost like he's the, I don't know how that's operating exactly. It's almost like he's some force in the universe that's like detecting this inconsistency. This, I'm totally full of shit here, but it's funny to consider that Wendell's function is not what I thought it was.
Yeah, all. but also I think we don't want to overcomplicate this and say like actually Wendell is, we're supposed to see him as a force for good, because that is absolutely not true, right? Like Wendell is a bastard. The book is not subtle about this. He's an awful human being.
Yeah, at more at best, I would say he's like redeemable at this point.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah,
like I don't think he's done anything so bad that I would say like he's crossed the line into irredeemable monsterhood. I think bastard is a perfectly fine word to apply to him. But I could see him going in a different direction.
So your kind of interpretation, or one possible interpretation of his experience in the territories, is this could right him in a way.
Right him, or give him an opportunity for some kind of noble sacrifice rather than just continually fucking everything up.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, he could entirely just continue to be this slimy snake that we've seen up to this point, and that wouldn't surprise me at all either. It's just more. I think it's interesting, and it makes the story more interesting that it's actually left kind of up in the air, and that we're left surprised.
Sure. I did want to talk about this thing Wendell says while he's in the closet, because I think it ties into what we were talking about before. So what Wendell has snuck into the closet, and he's sitting there just waiting for Jack and Judy to come in with his tape recorder, and he starts kind of ranting to himself here. And we see here it says, Wendell deserves the nice car and the fancy house, has earned them thrice over, and his sense of deprivation makes him seethe with resentment. Golden boys get everything handed to them on diamond-studded salvers. People fall all over themselves to give them stuff they don't even need, but a legendary, selfless, working stiff and gentleman like the press, like Wendell Greene, it cost Wendell Greene $20 to hide in a dark, crowded little closet just to do his job. Which, okay, so Wendell is obviously like overinflating his worth, right? For sure. However, Jack Sawyer is a golden boy who gets everything handed to him on a golden plate. Like, that is textually true. Like, he's the guy that stopped stopped gambling because he just kept winning every time. He
Right.
is the blessed one. He is the greater one. He has been handed all these things, and I mean, you could partially say it's earned through the adventures of the talisman, but a lot of the stuff he was getting, prior to the adventures of the talisman, he is exceptional. He is unique. He is singular, right? And so I think Wendell's wrong in that, in his I deserve all these things because I am the hard-working reporter. No, you're a muckraker, dude. You suck. But Jack is a special, and is it fair that the specials get all the special treatment?
Right. Yeah. Jack is literally compared to Jesus many, many times.
Yeah.
And I like, if anything, the interesting, well, yeah, I mean, what you just said, spot on. I think maybe one angle you could take is say, you're right, Wendell. You're right that he is lucky and you are unlucky.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in one sense unfair. But also, resentment is bad for you regardless of whether or not it's unfair. Resentment is just destroying you. So
I mean, we don't have people in this world that are like literally like blessed by the white to be like superheroes, right? Like, we don't have that, but we certainly do have people in this world that are blessed in some ways or another, where they just get things. I mean, the extremely wealthy people born into extreme wealth, they're not going to have that tough of a life comparatively, right? And while that is frustrating and angry, and we should try to build our systems in which those people are, the amount of those people that exist are absolutely minimized, just allowing yourself to seethe in anger and resentment to the point that it destroys you cannot be the answer either.
Or absolutely maximized. We should all be.
Well, that's true. Position. Yeah, we should let's all be billionaires.
Yeah, let's all be billionaires. That's the future. But no, I mean, it's interesting because we've said before, I've said before that fear is at the root of all the evil of Stephen King characters, and I think that's maybe not 100% right, because I think resentment is also at the root of some of the evil, the bad Stephen King characters.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Because Wendell Greene doesn't seem particularly afraid. Like, he doesn't seem like a fearful person.
I mean, he can be, but not in this instance. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of brave of him to do the sneaky, shitty things that he does, and so I don't think we can say he's like a coward in that sense. He's an odious little troll, but he's not necessarily a fearful person. He is a super resentful person, and that's his flaw, and that's, I think, what we're tackling with this.
No, I like that a lot.
Cool.
So we first hear Jack and Judy's conversation from Wendell's point of view, who assumes that they're talking about boning. And I love how the conversation is kind of written so they could actually be talking about boning.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, no. Like, as the reader, for a second, you're like, "Wait, what? Whoa!" I'm
not sure if we're gonna have time for this. I really do love this part though, where Judy says, "You talk too much," and Jack says, "I mean, I love you. In your way, you love me. But you know what? Just by coming here, you made me more than I was. There's this sort of beam that comes out of you, and I just locked onto that beam. Jack, you lived there, and all I could do was peek at it for a little while." That's what all women say to me when I tell them I love them too. In your way, you do, but
yeah,
it's that beam.
Yeah, well, it's hard to ignore that steel beam that sticks out of your chest at all times.
Yeah, that's definitely what they meant by that.
You should get that looked at, by the way.
So Jack takes hold of Judy and begins to flip, and he does. But, well, I mean, it's a different kind of flipping, right? First of all, Judy herself doesn't flip. We see that she remains in the room. She can't flip over into the territories. We're told specifically she can't do that. But then a bunch of stuff from the office goes with Jack, including, of course, as we talked about, our friendly neighborhood reporter, Wendell Greene, who's all the way over in the closet, but apparently still close enough to hitch a ride to the territories. What did you make of all this?
It only occurred to me much later that, like, maybe it was the fact that he had the tape recorder running that, like, kind of sucked him in. Like,
interesting.
Like you're recording, you're literally recording evidence of this magical thing, and so the consequence is like, well, you're just going to get slurped along because we don't allow that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I mean, I have a lot of questions on the magic. Like, okay, so Judy doesn't flip, Judy can't flip. because she has a living twinner. I guess Jack had to flip next to Judy so that he could like locate her twinner, because that was kind of the goal of this. And then Wendell coming is, it doesn't really matter, honestly. But that's going to be fun one way or the other.
Yeah. So finally, as the chapter ends, Jack comes face to face with Judy's twinner, a woman named Sophie, which, by the way, is a name we've heard before. I don't know if you remember that. It's a name Judy, one of the names Judy wrote down was Sophie. So there's an answer to that question.
All right. Gotcha.
But the most important thing about Sophie, she's single, baby.
Go for it, Jack.
You've earned it, buddy.
Yeah.
All right. So here it is, Matt. We move on to chapter 21. And it's another one of these chapters, one of those, what we call the pre-third act Kingsposition chapters. We've had many of these before, right? We've definitely covered chapters like this on this podcast before. But here's another one for us. Let's kind of explain to our characters and our readers what the fuck is actually going on in the wider world of this story. And that's what this chapter is.
Yeah. And it sure is.
It sure is. So Jack takes a few moments here at the beginning of this chapter to creepily say Sophie's name over and over and over again, which, let me tell you, ladies love that so much.
Uh-huh. You know, the only thing that makes it not super creepy is that the text conveys that she's also pretty much equally blown away by Jack.
Yeah. I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but you're absolutely right that like the emotion of this scene is two people incredibly in love with each other that are just blown away that they're getting to witness each other's presence.
Right.
And then he starts to look around and take in his surroundings. And here's the first big bombshell drop of the chapter. He feels he's almost in the territories, but not quite. And we don't really know what to do with that yet. But they're in a hospital pavilion tent, Matt, a hospital pavilion tent run by, we're told, the little sisters. The little sisters.
Huh.
Matt.
Okay. Okay, all right.
So does this finally once and for all answer your question of, is the territories midworld?
No.
Maybe that's because what Sophie says next is, once there were a dozen or more of these tents in the territories on world and midworld, now there are only a few, mayhaps just this one. So like, in this moment, you think, oh, the little sisters. So we've now directly linked the place that Jack just flipped to Roland Deschain, because we have the little sisters of Illyria. This is something that he directly came across. And so the territories is midworld. And then the next line, the text is like, it says midworld and territories is two different places. So you're just like, what?
And what the fuck is on world?
Good question,
what
Matt.
What the fuck is on world, Scott?
Well, there's in world, there's end world, there's mid world, and then you just on the world.
Never heard of it. It's not anything. I'm
Matt,
insane now.
It's on world, Matt. Come on. You telling me they're just making this shit up as they go? No.
No. Of course not. What's funny to me is part of my brain is also like, how do you know that, Sophie? how do you know how many little sisters there are in the entirety of Midworld?
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of magic, right?
She seems unique and special. Yes, mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. So I love the way the text says this here. So we have this whole scene where like Jack is kind of blown away by Sophie, and then the text goes, "It would have been impolite to break away while Jack was meeting the love of his life, not to mention bad narrative business. So we didn't. Now, however, let us slip through the thin walls of the hospital tent." I just love when the narrator gets where the Stephen King of the narrator shines through. It's just really wonderful.
It is very fun.
So we do slip through the tent and briefly go see Wendell Greene outside, kind of losing his mind a little bit. He's just kind of shell-shocked. We don't actually see him talk much throughout this whole thing. He's just kind of blown away and not believing what's happening to him. And then we see a man approach him. A gunslinger, faded jeans, a blue chambray shirt, a neck scarf, and a heavy revolver on his hip. We might, for a second, be led to believe that this is Roland Deschain himself, and he has arrived literally into our story, which would have just been too much. It would have just been too much. We see here that this is actually just Parkus, Speedy Parker's twinner, and he's got a two-headed parrot on his shoulder. Sure.
Yep. Just everything.
I think before we go on, we just have to kind of sit down here and be like, this is a chapter absolutely stuffed with Dark Tower references, right? The next thing that happens is Parkus takes Sophie and Jack, and they're going to go inside a stone circle in which a speaking demon used to live but doesn't live anymore, and they're going to palaver inside the stone circle, and it's just like Dark Tower thing after Dark Tower thing after Dark Tower thing. And I guess I'll preface this entire conversation with, we've kind of already talked about this. I think we talked about this during Insomnia, where I love the Dark Tower references that are vague gestures much more than I like the Dark Tower references that are like people talking to our characters about Roland Deschain. And that's kind of where I fall with this stuff too, where I like the stuff with like, we're told about, the breakers. We have to stop the breakers from taking down the beam, and just being this vague thing that our main character only kind of partially understands. They're only getting one small window into the enormity of the world and the battle that's going on here. I feel like, in my opinion, this is almost too much.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's too much. Like I'm fixing to kind of just let you go through the lore stuff that we're about to go through, probably without commenting on it a ton, because I think it is kind of a distraction from. It's a bit of a false note for me. We talked about this before. Like I care about Jack. I care about rescuing Tyler. I care about catching the bad guy. I don't care about the beams right now. I don't care about the Dark Tower right now. Okay. I cared about the Dark Tower and the beams when we were reading the Dark Tower, because the Dark Tower series dramatized all of that and made me care about it. But mainly I cared about Roland and Eddie and Jake and Susanna and Oy. And also we already saved the beams. So like emotionally hard for me to worry too much about it. So like this doesn't raise the stakes for me. This is like the moment in the movie where you already care about the plucky characters, and then they're like, oh my god, if they get the final obelisk, then they'll destroy the earth. And you're like, I don't care about the earth. I just want, like, I care about the stakes of the characters that you've established. And so like I think this doesn't really buy anything for me. Like it's okay. Now setting all that aside, it's like fun, and it's like, neat, like Dark Tower stuff, cool. Like the kid in me is able to enjoy that, but mainly like it kind of goes on like quite a bit, and it's really just this dump of Dark Tower stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, I don't care. Well,
it's this interesting combination of stuff that we already know because we know Dark Tower stuff, and so they're telling it to a character who doesn't care about it. There's a wonderful line in the middle of all this stuff where Jack just directly asks Speedy, how much of this do I actually need to know? Right. And the answer to that question is probably not that much, actually. I mean, I think Speedy says, like, look, we don't know how much you need to know or not, and we won't know until this whole thing is over. So I'm just going to tell you all of it. And okay, fair. But the fascinating thing, and I think you're so right about, the stakes and who we care about and what we care about and why. And I think that we had a very similar problem in Insomnia, where we're kind of told, specifically in Insomnia, you have to stop this man from crashing this plane into this building and blowing up this building because there's a boy in there that's going to be pivotal to the survival of the world. Well, for our characters, being told that 200 people are going to die is enough motivation for them to get off their ass and stop it, right? Yeah. And right here, Jack is already fully committed to saving Tyler Marshall. And it has nothing to do with the fact that Tyler Marshall's a breaker that could bring about the end of the world. It has to do with the fact that Tyler Marshall's a child and he wants to help the man and woman who have lost their child and also stop the bad guy that's kidnapping and murdering and eating children. So like, I'm with you on this, where I think it's cool that there's also, you can say also Tyler's a breaker, and that would be very bad in a cosmic sense. And that's why the forces of the universe are kind of pushing Jack towards this thing. But from a stakes perspective, yeah, you just kind of go like, huh, neat. Okay. Yeah. And then there's not much else to do with it emotionally other than, oh, that's neat. That's a neat connection. Cool. Right. Okay. Moving on.
Yeah, I just want to say I don't hate it. It didn't drive me crazy or anything. It's more like I'm just like, my greatest complaint about it is that it just goes on for quite a bit, and I'm like, okay, I want to get back to the stuff I care about, which is the murder mystery or the kidnapping mystery, I guess it is now.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think nothing illustrates this point more to me than at the very beginning of this whole conversation, Speedy Parker just says, Carl Bierson, he says, he raised a clenched fist, then shakes it in triumph. That was his name in Chicago. Burnside here in French Landing. Case closed. Game over. Zip up your fly. Where is he, Speedy? Save me some time. Shut up, Parker says. So like they just gave him his name. Like, that was the one big part of the mystery left, which is his name. And so it's almost signaling, oh, by the way, all the detective stuff you were working on didn't matter because here's his name gifted to you on a silver platter. But it is interesting that the text does kind of, by the end of this, work back to the fact that no, that stuff actually did matter, because the only reason I, Speedy, know his name is Carl Bierston is because they actually did pick a fingerprint up off the phone, and it did match someone in our system from Chicago that was named Carl Bierston. So it's not like Speedy just had this knowledge because he's Speedy. He actually learned that through sources he has apparently in the police department of French Landing. That part isn't explained, but yeah. But it's just interesting, like the kind of waffles back and forth between, hey, none of this detective part of the book actually mattered because now we're talking about cosmic Dark Tower shit, to, oh no, by the way, it actually did kind of matter.
Hey,
it's just weird.
Now I think Speedy was the one who made the call to Wendell Greene.
Could be.
Yeah, there you go.
So we learn here also that Mr. Munchin is a demon, a powerful one. We already knew this, but we get it confirmed. We're told that he was the Monday Man when he was possessing Albert Fish, and he's Mr. Munchin now. So I think that's a thing that you didn't know up until this point, right? That the fisherman stuff, the connection there is more than just similar. It's the demon possessed two different dudes.
Yeah, I think I was dead wrong. I think I said it was like some kind of copycat thing, but it's like, no, it's literally the same. Well, or maybe that was the ambiguity, is like, I think maybe the book wants us to think it's the same, and it's like, yeah, it is. It is the same guy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's confirmed.
So we also learned that he works for the Crimson King, and it's his job to go out and find breakers for all the reasons we already know about. I wonder how, we've been pretty harsh to this so far, at least relative to the way we normally are. And of course, we have to slot this book in where it appeared in time, right? Which was before the final 3 books of the Dark Tower. So all the stuff we're talking about, oh, we already knew all this, we already knew all this, we already knew all this. A person reading this book at the time wouldn't. So do you think this would have worked better on you had you read this before you read the final 3 books of the Dark Tower?
Well, if I were like a Dark Tower fan, then I'd probably be like, oh, this is so juicy and like, okay, so I think it's fair to talk about that. Like Stephen King, as he's writing these things, I think part of him is even thinking like, I'm going to throw a bone to my loyal Dark Tower fans who who are just desperate for more information, and the people in that context are probably like, oh, thank you, this is awesome, man. Like, probably a lot of people who were annoyed with my reaction here because they're like, this was awesome when it came out for and I'm like, I get it. I'm reading it after having read the Dark Tower. Yeah. So it lands very differently.
I actually think you're right. I will say, despite the fact that as a Dark Tower fan who hadn't gotten to read any Dark Tower stuff in a few years, it was probably very exciting to read the name Roland, to see the Dark Tower, to just be like, oh my God, the universe that I'm obsessed with, and there hasn't been a new book in years, he mentioned it. He mentioned it right there. But I also still think our complaints about its function at like a narrative level are still valid, regardless of whether you know the stuff or not. So
yeah,
I'm of two minds about it, and I agree with you. Like I don't hate this chapter at all. And I think there's still plenty of interesting stuff to talk about here about the Dark Tower. I think there is some new information gleaned from this, just like On World.
Right. Yeah. That's well. Yeah. Well. Okay. So also another thing I think is fun about it, which I don't know if we're gonna talk about specifically, is like he mentions like where the breakers go, and for me, I was thinking like, oh, this is fun, like archaeological evidence of like Stephen King's train of thought over the years about like what is the nature of the breakers, what is the nature of, what ends up being Blue Haven,
yeah.
And I think it seems clear to me that he changes his mind between this book and actually writing the Dark Tower. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we're described as, where the breakers go. Parkus says they are kept in a place, a basement, yes, or a cavern where there is essentially no time. Like this kind of ties to what Judy's dreams of about these kids like walking on rocks and dirt and stuff and blood, which is very, very different from what Blue Heaven ends up being. Although I do think the part about Blue Heaven like existing outside of time, I do think that was still true though. So that part he kept. But yeah, I agree. At least from what we've seen in this, there's no indication that, actually it's just like a 1950s town and they're just chilling on lounge chairs in a basement.
Which, I mean, it's a really fun twist, right? If especially if you get to that book and you're expecting like, okay, they're going to find the breakers are all going to be chained to the walls of a dungeon, being forced under threat of torture to do the breaking thing, and then what you find is like, no, they're literally not being coerced at all, except they can't leave, and they just do it because they kind of enjoy the feeling of it, and they're bored.
It's my favorite. It's one of my favorite twists in the whole series. That idea that like you're definitely, and I wonder this actually, I think you're right that this depiction of it, or at least what we're led to believe here, reinforces how good that twist could land for someone reading these in chronological order, because it is building up this feeling of this evil monster cannibal serial killer is capturing these kids and plucking them out of their lives and depositing them in this horrible monstrous cavern where they're forced to help destroy the world, and it just really builds to something quite shocking and so much more richly complex than I would have ever expected. So I think that is one way that this could redeem itself, in that, from that angle, seen in that order, it makes that moment in the Dark Tower book land even more to me.
It makes me appreciate that moment even more than I already did, honestly.
Yeah, definitely.
Can say that for this bit of the story.
Mm-hmm. Another morsel that I think is new to us that's worth talking about is this. Parkus describes the last 200 years of existence as the age of poisoned thought, and into this age came a lot more powerful people with the touch, more breakers, basically. And so, like, we learn that the Crimson King has been working on taking the beam and the tower down forever, but in this age of poisoned thought, suddenly there came people that were powerful enough to actually make this happen, which is interesting. I mean, what we've kind of talked about King's view on modernity a lot in throughout the various books we've read, but this is a specific like, oh, we suck now. But it's interesting that mental powers comes with, oh, we're shitty now.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like 200 years. You mean like the era of the Enlightenment?
Yeah, kind of.
We're calling that the era of poison thought. That's fascinating. Yeah, that's really interesting, and it comes along with a greater power for destruction, which is indeed true. But in the real world, like we've developed our technology, and we can actually literally destroy the world. But fantasy wise, we have the mental power to destroy the universe like that. It's cool.
Yeah. So there's another thing that's worth talking about here. So they're talking directly about the cavalry coming, and Jack assumes it's himself. Wrong. And Parkas says, the cavalry is Roland of Gilead and his new gunslingers, or so those of us who want the tower to stand, or to fall in its own time, dare hope. That's interesting, right? So,
Yeah.
First of all, I don't think we've said this in the past, but what we're told here is that, we're at the point where there's really only one beam left, or two beams left, actually. One is about to fall and one is still moderately strong. We're told here by Parkas that the first of the beams to fall fell naturally, that it had nothing to do with the Crimson King and his breakers, that the beam wore out and collapsed. And that, combined with the idea of the Dark Tower will eventually just fall in its own time, is an interesting wrinkle on the whole cosmos, right? That, we're not talking just about like the extinction event of people or something. We're talking about the end of existence as we know it. And it seems to say that like this is something that is inevitable. The tower is going to fall one day. Now we want to stop it from happening due to the machinations of an evil wizard man, but it seems to say that no, inevitably the tower will collapse, things will return to chaos. I mean, that's kind of true for existence for us, right? Like inevitably our sun's going to go boom and Earth be there no more.
Yeah, or depending on what flavor
Entropy.
of cosmology is in play when you're listening to this, since that seems to change every few years. Everything's either going to just rip apart eventually, or just everything will turn cold, or what have you. And it seems like King is somebody who thinks that death has its place in the world, and if you remove death from the natural order of things, then it's always going to be perverse and bad, which I don't really agree with specifically, but I don't care. It's fine. I get it. I get why people think that. And so the idea that the universe has its time and has its end, I think makes sense. And then also another interesting thing about the Dark Tower in general is that there's just this time isn't really a solid concept in the Dark Tower universe anyway.
Sure.
We have overt time loops, we have time travel, we have slipping between dimensions where effectively it's like a previous year in that dimension over there somehow, and then there's doors between times, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like the idea that the universe is going to end someday, it's like that's kind of a less scary thought in a universe that is like knotted up with time travel and loops and all of that stuff. It's like there's a sort of eternity embedded in the universe like that. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
yeah, no, I get that. It kind of to me makes me go even more, hey Roland, stop it. Like if we're going to introduce the idea of inevitability to this whole thing, then like it kind of, one of the things where some of, not everyone, but some of the people that were our listeners kind of pushed back against our not anti-Roland stance, but like just the idea that like this whole mission of his was stupid from the beginning and self-absorbed and selfish, and he was just kind of hiding in the idea of saving the universe as an excuse to really do what he wanted the whole time. And I think the idea that, oh well, the tower is going to fall on its own one day eventually, like that's going to inevitably happen. I think that also puts that in harsh perspective too, but not entirely though, because like that's like saying like, oh, we might as well not stop crime because the sun's gonna nova someday. It's not the exact same thing, but I do think it like puts it in this like you're torturing yourself and you're killing everyone that you love for this quest for a thing that the beings that sit around the tower are like, the thing's gonna fall eventually anyway, that's just gonna happen. I don't know. I just find it really interesting that that's introduced into this cosmology kind of extremely casually, like in the middle of an M dash, right? It's just an M dash in the middle of the sentence.
No, it is funny, especially since maybe this was hinted at in a different book, but this feels like it might be the first time we've seen it.
I think gestured towards is the closest we get to, but
yeah, right. And you can imagine, over the long arc of time, that maybe over and over and over, the tower comes within a hair's breadth of falling, and then some knightly hero has to stand and be true and keep it from falling, and then
Mm-hmm.
that just buys us another period of time.
Yeah.
And Roland just being one of many, and Jack in a sense being one of many too.
Sure.
If we're willing to kind of say that the talisman does actually have some kind of important analogy to the Dark Tower.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the eternally unanswered questions about the Dark Tower and Roland and this whole thing is like with this time loop stuff. Okay, so is the tower literally being put into danger every time we jump back to the beginning of Roland's journey, or is this actually just part of the loop he's trapped in, that he believes the tower is in danger and is going to go on saving it, And there's no answer to that question. I don't want that question ever answered, but it is one of those things that just the structure of that finale forces you to think about.
Yeah, it's a fun thought. I like that.
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
So speaking of the case that we're talking about, though, not the Dark Tower or breakers or any of that stuff, but the fisherman, the guy we want to catch,
Oh, yeah.
Jack does a little reasoning of his own here, a little detective work here, and decides that the reason that Tyler is both alive and not handed over to the Crimson King yet is because good old Bernie is a little bit of a crisis point right now. He knows he has to give this powerful boy up, but he wants to eat him himself because he looks delicious. And so this is one of those moments where you can talk about the way evil kind of fights evil, right? That if if Charles Burnside was a more honorable serial killer cannibal, he would have done his duty to the man he made a deal with and just handed over Tyler immediately, and then the tower would have been fucked, right? But he didn't do that because he's selfish and self-absorbed, and he wants his thing and doesn't want to share, basically.
Yeah, like everyone who works for the Crimson King, he's a bad employee.
Yes. You just can't hire good minions these days, you know?
No, I totally on point about this being evil destroying itself yet again. It's great. Love it.
Yeah. So Jack has a goal now. He leaves the situation learning a lot about towers and beams and breakers and all the stuff that doesn't actually matter to him because he has a goal. He's got to find the Black House. Inside the Black House will be an entrance to the Furnace Lands where Tyler is being kept, and he's got to go there and get him before Munchin does. And so that's our ticking clock and our goal. So at the end of this chapter, at the end of this pre-third act exposition chapter, we're set. We're ready to go.
Awesome.
So we did learn some things. We had some of the King Cosmos expanded on us, but yeah, I mean, overall, I'm kind of with you on the this went on a little too long, and I didn't need all of it side.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll be eating my words later if a lot of this specific information does come into play in terms of Jack actually like resolving the plot. I'm sure some of it will, but yeah, on the whole, I mean, I enjoyed this week's reading a lot. I enjoyed the biker stuff particularly.
Yeah, I loved that.
And it's, I admit it tickled me to see all the Dark Tower references. It's just like, I still have my complaints.
Yeah, I mean, I think to reiterate, I think it's just, it's not that I dislike the Dark Tower stuff, but like from an emotionally resonant perspective, all I'm left with is just cool. That was neat. Cool.
Right.
And especially when you're doing like an analysis podcast, I don't know what else to say other than, oh, well, it's cool. Look, it's a tower. It's here. And they said Roland's name. I like Roland. They said his name. Hooray.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So the palaver over, Jack says goodbye to Sophie, who he now loves like so much, like way more than he even liked Judy. So he wants to return to her. And hopefully he will, but right now he's got to go solve a case. So he grabs Wendell, flips back over, and our chapter ends. And that's where you haven't read any Black House for 7-8 days now.
If not more.
Oh yeah, it's actually more because that was
it's like 2 weeks.
It is. It's like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Poor man.
I don't even remember who the main character is.
We just talked about him for an hour and a half.
Oh. Yeah.
All right. That is going to do it for the book reading section of the podcast. You can tell I'm rusty, Matt. I don't know words anymore.
Me too.
Actually, what I was doing is I was trying to kill time as I opened our schedule to refresh my memory on which chapters we're doing next week. Next week, we are going to continue with Black House. We've got chapters 22 through 25, which will actually get us to the end of part 3, Knight's Plutonian Shore. And then after that, Matt, it's only one more episode until the end of the book, if you can believe it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
We're getting our sprint on to the end of this book. Yeah, it's gonna be a good one. It's gonna be good.
Sounds good.
All right, Matt, let's talk about the discussion question. If you will recall, 14 days ago, we asked the question, what is your favorite poem? You might not remember why we asked that question. It's because the Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven made a entrance directly into the story. And we thought, let's talk about poetry. Let's get everyone's favorite poem. So a lot of you folks sent us copies of the poems as well. We are not going to read all those because I'm going to be honest with you. It's a lot of them and we don't want to be here for another hour. So we will maybe reference them and read what you guys wrote, but probably not actually read the actual poems.
Yeah. But because you included them, that means that other people who want to go peruse the Reddit post and so forth can do so if they want.
Absolutely.
So first, we have from Sigma. This might come as a surprise, but I don't really fuck with poems, although I desperately wish to. It's too abstract and elliptical for my taste and sensibility. The closest I have to an answer for this is music, so I'm going to do that. There seems to be a whole scene in Japan where a Japanese artist makes some ethereal beats and features a black artist to do some lyrics. From what I can tell, I don't know what language this is from, so I'm just going to say Nahubes was a pioneer in this, and lo-fi as a whole, though this brand of it is different from what you might understand as lo-fi. Substantial seems to be an expert at rhymes since he features so many of these artists' songs, and my favorite thus far is Feather by Nuhabes, featuring the aforementioned lyricist. That song just transports me to a different world where everything is watercolor and ever-shifting. Cool. That's a very I feel like you're cracking open a door to a world that I have no knowledge of and leaving me with a lot of tantalizing names and feelings and thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of, music just being, music is poetry for sure. And lyrics are the poetry of the modern generation for sure. So,
yeah, right. And there's something to be said for the kind of poetry where it's more about like almost free association, like just leaving you with a feeling more than necessarily like there's a specific theme here. Not that I'm saying that's what this is. I'm just like, yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of poetry and music.
Infant Soup says, my favorite poem is Bluebird by Charles Bukowski. To me, it's an ode to the bottling of emotions and feelings, something I am indeed guilty of. Hey, me too. Bukowski is in general just really hits me deep. And Infant Soup left the poem on our subreddit if you want to go ahead and read that. I enjoy Bukowski a lot. He's one of the poets that I had read before I decided I wanted to really like poetry. I haven't read this one, but I like Bukowski. Have you ever read any Charles Bukowski?
I don't know. I don't think so. It doesn't sound familiar. Maybe in the course of some English class I did, but I don't know.
Actually why I read Charles Bukowski? Why? It was because I was at a local brewery in Dallas with some friends, and they had an artist there, a local artist. They come and they put their art on display in this area where everyone's hanging out, and you can buy stuff. And one of the artists was like taking poets and doing like portraits of poets with a quote from their poetry on it. And my friend saw this one by Bukowski and was like, oh, I like that. I'm going to buy it. And I was like, do you even know who that guy is? And he's like, no, I'm going to buy it though. And I was like, I don't really know who that is either. And so I went and just read some Bukowski and I really enjoyed it. So
cool. That's fun.
Yeah.
All right. Next, Ho Demon says, my favorite poem is usually a piece by Chinese warlord Zhang Zongchang or Zongchang. I'm sorry. I apologize. About the horror and indignity of living in a hierarchical, authoritative system at any position but the top, and the call of the void any feeling person who has worked in retail has surely felt at some point. The last line is perhaps unpodcastable. Sorry for necessitating extra editing to believe it. Well, we can't read this because it's
in
it's in several different languages which are not English.
uh-huh.
But in any case, it's short. They also, yeah, there's I guess I'll just take this opportunity to talk about the idea of like translations of poems and how many people's favorite poems are indeed poems that were not written in the language in which they're reading them, which is such a fascinating idea to me, because it's like you know it's just sort of almost just a coincidence that you can make this rhyme in your own language as well as the original one, or maybe it's not a poem that rhymes, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, like, they can be so powerful that they retain their power across translation, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I like that. Gerardo says, my favorite poem is Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb, read at Biden's inauguration. I can't express how powerful it was to me. It was the sign of the sun coming out after 4 long years of tumultuous, stormy, rocky, oppressive weather. She spoke truth, not shying away from our history, our problems, or the difficulties of the tasks ahead, yet it's optimistic and hopeful. She read it like a gunslinger, shooting words as her bullets, an absolute word slinger of our times. Yeah, I remember that. That was a really beautiful poem, read wonderfully. I really like that.
Awesome. That's a good answer, and from and a relatively new poem too. So our best years are not behind us.
No.
Belwas Deserve Better says, I'm going to assume we're not counting dirty limericks or vulgar toast as poetry. Why would you assume that?
Yeah, never assume that.
If that's the case, my knowledge of poetry is very limited. So I'll go with the one poem I can think of off the top of my head, Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. Inspired by the recent British plundering of Egyptian statuary, Shelley penned a short poem about a traveler who comes across an ancient ruined monument. Shelley juxtaposes the epitaph on the plinth. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. With the tumbled and weather-beaten remnants of the statue. A short and concise lesson on the fleeting nature of power, hubris of tyrants, and the inevitability of death. Ozymandias is one of the few poems that stuck with me.
Great poem.
Yeah, that's one that's fun to analyze for sure.
Yeah, and used in pop culture a lot too. Of course, Breaking Bad is the one that most people think of.
Yeah, I think that's one where a lot of people became aware of it and then fell in love with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Next, we have Favorited, who says, accepting epic poetry, got to give a shout out to the Iliad, but not sure if that's the kind of poem we're talking about. My favorite poem is They Flee From Me by Sir Thomas Wyatt. On the surface, it's just a man whining that women aren't as attracted to him as they used to be. The poem starts, they flee from me, that sometimes did me seek. But every phrase is packed with wordplay. The second line continues, with naked foot stalking in my chamber. Naked foot stalking? But a stocking is the opposite of a naked foot. I get it. That's funny.
Great.
Some of the wordplay is a bit anachronistic, like when Wyatt asks, Dear heart, how like you this? Dear heart is an evocative way to address one's own emotions, but the word heart is a term for a male red deer. So dear heart is a pair of homophones, which could also be heard as dear heart or dear heart, which doesn't work in audio, but you guys got me. I'm moving this week, and while packing my books, I realized I still have this old English lit anthology from college, which I've only saved because Volume 2 includes a Wyatt poem that I loved so well. Oh, that's great. I love wordplay so much. It's so fun.
Yeah. This sounds delightful. I want to read this one just for fun. I like that.
They did also include a link to the poem on the subreddit if you want to go check that one out. I love that little bit at the end of that Favorited kept their old English lit book from college because they had something in it they really liked. I think I did that too. I had, I obviously immediately sold almost all of the stupid textbooks I had to buy for exorbitant prices, but I think there were one or two I kept because either the class meant something to me or there was in that I really liked and I just wanted to keep.
Yeah, same. I think that a lot of my literature and also I think history textbooks I kept because I was like, this is actually like something I might return to. And I never did. Pear Jane says, like Scott, I always had a hard time thinking around the corners of poetry without discussing it actively in class. And so I've always been attracted to American poets like William Carlos Williams and Stephen Crane. Sorry. They're very king-like in their colloquial economical imagery, and Stephen Crane especially had a way of making a beautiful point through poetry. My favorite is A Man Said to the Universe, the only poem I committed to memory and still remember, other than one or two Shakespeare passages. And then they say, one of my college professors always liked to point out that this man was especially fortunate because the universe actually replied, which is you're gonna have to read the poem to get that.
Yeah, but it's a little tiny short poem that they posted, so it's great.
Yeah.
Just Stand 8460 says the film Equilibrium includes a reading by Sean Bean of a poem by William Butler Yeats called Aid Wishes for the Cloths of Heaven. I always found the scene haunting as he reads aloud the final 3 lines. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly because you tread on me. Is it my or me?
Because you tread on my dreams.
My dreams, yeah. Right before he eats a lead sandwich, courtesy of his partner, played by Christian Bale.
Yeah, see, Scott, I know how that poem ends because I watched that movie 500 times.
God, I remember college Matt being absolutely obsessed with that movie.
That's right.
Another great was Robert Browning's Child Roll Into the Dark Tower Came, for obvious reasons. The opening line is the best, which is, of course, my first thought was he lied in every word, which is a great opening line of a poetry.
Yeah. That is great.
Mm-hmm.
That is very great. All right. All 84001 says, I'm a Philistine when it comes to poetry. Not unless you count the many ribald chestnuts I've read off truck stop bathroom walls. To me, Here I Sit All Broken Hearted is as comparable to Robert Frost as gas station sushi is to fine dining. It all ends up in the same place, as they say. To claim my favorite poem would be disingenuous, but I always liked the wit of that Shakespeare sonnet where he pokes fun at all the love poems comparing women's appearance to nature. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun is basically a 1600s diss track built on self-deprecating humor. Old Bill is essentially saying, suck it, Petrarch. My lady ain't all that. Coral is more red than her lips, her booty flat, and she got rank-ass breath. But in the end, it's really kind of sweet and dear to, and dare we say woke for the time. Mm-hmm. It's not that he's mocking his mistress for being ugly. He's mocking the male gaze. He's saying, stop idealizing women and focusing so much on their appearance and holding them to this unattainable standard. Stop comparing everything, especially women, to the beauty of nature. For that, I suppose I can rank the Shakespeare sonnet higher than the anonymous quote I once saw scratched into the door of a Sunoco crapper. Eatin' ain't cheatin'.
By the way, I just want to say, the joke poetry you see written on a gas station wall totally counts as poetry.
Of course.
Everything counts. That's the beauty of poetry.
It's art.
Baby, Can You Dig Your Sam says, I can still recite Lord Byron's She Walks in Beauty, and there are many, many Shel Silverstein ditties that still roll off the tongue in their entirety. I highly recommend you check out Lawrence Ferlinghetti's poem collection, A Coney Island of the Mind. Most of the poems are short and are evocative of 1950s and 1960s America. My favorites are The Penny Candy Stand Behind the L and Johnny Nolan Has a Patch on His Ass. I'll also mention an E.E. Cummings poem called She Being Brand New. It's a poem about a car, but really, it's about sex. There's a great scene from an obscure 80s comedy called Plain Clothes where the protagonist reads this poem in front of his class and gets all the girls hot and bothered. I can also recite that poem as well. Not sure if that's something to be proud of or embarrassed about. I would say proud.
Certainly.
Because that sounds like exactly like the 80s comedies I know and love.
That's delightful. Mm-hmm. For some reason, I was reminded of, I guess it was the Shel Silverstein mention. I was reminded of Dr. Seuss. I was wondering if anybody said Dr. Seuss. I've come to appreciate Dr. Seuss more since having kids and having to read a lot of Dr. Seuss and realizing that it's just absolutely delightful. Mm-hmm. And more like careful and thoughtful than I gave him credit for as a 5-year-old.
Sure.
All right. Coach Wargo says, I rarely read poetry, a verse I found here or there online or a poem tucked inside a novel. But after reading Insomnia, I purchased Cemetery Nights by Stephen Dobbins. If you don't remember, it's the book that Dorrance gives Ralph. I take it out and read a poem every day before work. One poem has stuck with me for months since I first read it, The Gardener. It's about God reflecting on Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. But I think it really speaks to us, to all of us as we grow into adulthood. The final lines of the poem are listed in the subreddit.
I watched you just freeze and realize you didn't know what to say there. That was great.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you did that, Coach Margo. That's awesome. And you're a better person than I am, because I said I wanted to do that and then did not.
Yeah, you've guilted me. I think I'm gonna go on Amazon right now.
Do it.
Just get it.
Do
Cemetery Nights.
Yeah. Next, we have the Grokken dude who says, "It's Poe. We had a poetry group tour a school district in the 8th grade, and they performed many poems, including one I liked but never pursued, along the lines of, 'But I was 15. I was in a gifted class that took place at a neighborhood school once a week, so I was lucky enough to see if there are any at my own school. I'll never forget the rapt attention of the other school and the raucous crowd of my own. But they read aloud the poem Annabel Lee, and I fell in love with her, him, them. All of it?' I would cut out copies of that I printed during my library period and slipped them into books as I restocked the shelves for months. When I had to read something aloud for class, it was always her, them. Poe taught me in one fell swoop about unrequited love, loss, and heartache in 2003, just in time for My Chemical Romance and the swell of emo subculture to pick up the pieces."
Wow, yeah, perfect timing. You're right.
Yeah, that is perfect timing.
All right. Walking Dude 22 says, "I suppose I could list one of the classics: Shakespeare, Poe, Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, T.S. Butch Eliot, or Robert Sundance Browning. But those are all honorable mentions, but they would feel both pretentious and dishonest. No, I prefer the modern poets. My favorite poet, without a doubt, is the late, great Jim Steinman. If you don't know, you already know. He wrote most of Meatloaf's canon. He gave us Holding Out for a Hero and Total Eclipse of the Heart. One of my favorites of his is The Future Ain't What It Used to Be. Then there's the unforgettable Dr. Seuss, whose beloved poems and illustrations sit on many children's bookshelves." Yes. Yeah, see, that's a fun answer, because I'm sure there are many poets whose names we don't know, but we do know the name of the singer who made their song popular. And Dr. Seuss is great.
Yeah, man, I knew. I mean, obviously, I've heard of every single one of those songs, but I did not know. I did not know that there was one man behind all of them.
There's a lot of pop songs that are not written by the people who make them popular, and it never even occurs to me to think, like, who actually wrote this. I just even though I know this fact, I'm just like, Lady Gaga. Actually, I think Lady Gaga does write her own songs.
Yes.
Britney Spears wrote all these songs. Yeah.
I'm just really upset that Bonnie Tyler didn't write Total Eclipse of the Heart. That makes me so sad.
I can. You're totally derailed from. Yeah.
Trumpet Cop says, "I don't have a favorite poem. I've never liked poetry, at least once I grew past Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss. My feeling is, if you want to tell a story in meter and rhyme, put it to music. In that frame of mind, my favorite poet is probably Bob Dylan. His lyrics alone are still more enjoyable than most poetry. What is the difference, you ask? In a word, pretentiousness. Poetry seems very snobbish, while music seems more inclusive. Just my opinion, and your mileage may vary." I think that can be certainly true. I think there's a lot of poetry that come off as very pretentious, but I do think the cool thing about poetry is that it can be, all things. I don't think I'd describe Charles Bukowski, for example, as pretentious.
Yeah, it's
his poetry. His poems are dirty. They're dirty.
What's funny about Bob Dylan is, I don't know if it's my favorite poem, but I think for a long time it was my favorite poem was by Bob Dylan. And I'm not talking about a song. I'm talking about his poem Last Thoughts on Woody Guthrie, where it was basically his ode to Woody Guthrie after Woody Guthrie passed away. And it's very long, so I can't say I have it memorized, but I almost have it memorized still. And I thought it was,
that into a song?
Maybe he did, but the version that I learned was just him reading it out loud. So like it's on one of his tapes or CDs or whatever it was.
Yeah, that's probably what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, but he spoke it at some event, and it was just him reading it aloud, from like tattered handwritten pages in his pocket, basically.
Wow. Yeah.
Anyway, Bob Dylan.
Fucking love Bob Dylan.
Yes,
so good.
Quirky Beans says 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, better lock your door.
Do you know what that's from, Matt?
Is that the Freddy Krueger?
There you go.
Yeah.
What is the name of that movie? Do you even know it?
Friday the 13th.
No.
Halloween.
No.
Nightmare Before Christmas.
No. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Jesus. You're so horror illiterate sometimes, Matt.
I was almost there. That was close. They say if Quirky Bean says if Avatar: The Last Airbender counts as anime, which I think it does.
I have officially declared it as yes.
This counts as a poem. They say I remember kids singing this on the playground. Then it was creepy, and ever since I watched the movie in my teens, it's been stuck in my head. Perhaps it's more of a rhyme than a poem. Is there a difference? Can someone ask a blind man? In a similarly simple yet morbid vein, there is Ring Around the Rosie. That is a weird-ass thing for little kids to chant. It's about a plague, and yet I will still chant and then fall down, as the ritual demands, every time my little one asks. Well, most of the time. I will, at the very least, drunkenly walk to the couch and fall down on that. Cut me some slack. I've got a whack back that needs a good crack. Dr. Seuss also has some bangers, but if your kid tries to get you to read Fox in Socks, it's a trick. Don't do it. I don't know if I have that one.
You don't have Fox and Socks?
No. What's funny is Dr. Seuss has way more books than I realized as a child. Yeah. Like, I think I was only really familiar with like The Cat in the Hat and One Fish, Two Fish and like the Lorax, but he's got like a shitload of books.
Remember when the estate of his took like 2 books that no one ever read out of circulation, and then a bunch of people pretended to be really mad about it?
I do. Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah. I love everyone.
Next we have Emperor Fry the Solid, who says he picks the Jabberwocky. Okay, maybe not the best poem ever in terms of complicated emotional landscapes, but the Jabberwocky is a poem that keeps on giving. Creepy, absurd, and fun. Each word Carol invented contains multitudes. One of the many delightful rabbit holes in Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, I feel like this is one of the ones that they taught us in school, because they're like, hey, I bet kids will love this poem that has a bunch of made up words in it. And they were right. They were right.
Yeah. I in our class, we wrote our own poems with made up words, and that was super fun. I remember that being like just a really fun, like memorable and fun experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The Walking Hard Case says, as much as I've tried, I've never really been able to get into poetry. I must be one of those stubborn people who poetry just never speaks to. My genuine answer would be The Raven, but for obvious reasons, I can't choose that. That said, my answer, Blaine is a pain, and that is the truth. Bada bing, bada boom. That's my poetry answer. Here's hoping that does it for you.
It does.
It's totally satisfactory.
Fellow says, personally, I tend to favor poems with more ornate language, as well as really striking or even difficult metaphors. The difference between a novel and a poem is like the difference between a beer and liquor. With a beer, you want something refreshing, but not too strong, because you'll be chugging a lot of it for a long time. With liquor, you want something that really packs a punch and might even burn a little going down, because you can only take a few shots, and so they'd better make an impression. Some of my favorite poems are ones I could barely understand when I first read them, whereas novels that come off that way don't even get finished, much less reread. That being said, one of my favorite poets is Dylan Thomas. I think most people probably know a few of his poems, even if they don't remember him by name, because I recall covering both And Death Shall Have No Dominion, as well as Do Not Go Gentle in That Good Night in high school English Lit. 2 other favorites of mine are A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Fire of a Child in London and In My Craft or Sullen Art. And Fellow put links to all 4 of those poems on the subreddit if you want to check any of them out.
Excellent. A+.
I didn't know we were grading.
Well, I mean, I can't fail to recognize the amount of effort that went into linking 4 separate poems.
Touche.
For me to read later, because those all sound great. Read Admiral Bottom, or maybe Read Admiral Bottom, I don't know, says, feel free to clarify. Says, Pat Barker of Houston, Texas. Not only did she never marry any of her teenage cousins, but she spoke from a radical perspective and recorded many of her poems, which are available on YouTube.
That's a Poe dig, by the way.
Oh, okay.
That girl on Poe dig.
That's great. That's funny. My favorite is called, what's funny is you could read this as Woman Slaughter or Woman's Laughter, because it's like crammed together like that. A poem written about the femicide of her sister by her abusive husband.
I think it's the Slaughter one.
Yeah, I think it is the Slaughter one. But also, you don't write it that way unless you want there to be some ambiguity.
Sure.
Like the Odyssey, it's long, but also like the Odyssey, it challenges the perception of law as protector. But another of her poems, more appropriate for Black House, is called Georgia, Georgia, Georgia on My Mind. It deals with the same themes and is about the Atlanta child murders of the early 80s. Oh, that's horrifying. I love it.
I remember, gosh, I watching I can't remember what the show is, but watching a show about the child murders in Atlanta in the 80s, and like it's a thing that I never knew anything about. It's one of those things in history that like no one ever taught you, and then you watch a show about it and you're like, holy shit, how is no one ever talking about this? This was insane.
Scott, I got to tell you, I don't know what you're talking about.
Look it up, man. Look it up.
Don't know if I want to know what you're talking about because it sounds bad.
It's real bad. Real bad.
Well, shit.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Next up, we have Damien to me, who says, I want to add an Australian poem to the mix. The Man from Snowy River is a fast-paced poem about the escape of a valuable horse from a station and how after thunderous chase and extraordinarily feats of horsemanship, it is recaptured by the least likely horseman of them all. The Man from Snowy River is the tale of the underdog who rises to the occasion and triumphs. The first line is known by almost every Australian because we have to learn it in school. And then they read that first line. They say The Man from Snowy River was written by Banjo Patterson and published in 1890. I think that's so fun because, like, you know, you and I have been talking about like all the poems that we absolutely read in school or were taught in school. And I think it's so fun that, you know, there's other countries in the world, Matt. I don't know if you knew that. And they have different poems that they read. Like, I've never heard of this poem, but apparently it's like a staple in Australian schools.
That doesn't sound right to me. All right. That's fun. That's we have delved into Australian culture in the past with our Doofcast episode on something from Australia. Michael B.
So we really just gonna move on.
Yep. Michael B says, I like my poetry to convey a story and count the following as some of my favorites. The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert W. Service. It also has a great character named Sam McGee, a Tennessean who is deathly afraid of the cold, prospecting for gold in the Arctic Circle. It also contains the line, now a promise made is a debt unpaid, which was quoted to me by my father time and time again when I forgot to do something I had promised to do growing up. The Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. What else can I say? 'Twas brillig. If you haven't seen the Muppets do this one, check it out. Oh, I'm not aware of that. That's fun. I love the Jabberwocky, so... A little on the heavier side, Gunga Din and Tommy by Rudyard Kipling. Two poems about the English army in India in the 1800s.
I've read Gunga Din.
I don't know if I've read a lot of Kipling actually, but I don't remember if I've read these. And that's all I have to say about that.
Were you, by the way, to circle back around to your Australia comment, were you talking about Breaker Morant?
I was definitely talking about the movie that is actually about South Africa. Yeah. And then I tried to just rush on past that.
And I didn't let you do it. I'm so sorry.
Pretend that I'm not a fucking idiot.
I mean, he is Australian, so there's that.
The character is Australian, and that's why I'm not a complete fucking idiot. And it's about the tensions between the British imperial colonies.
Yes.
That's what it's really about. And also just about, it's sad.
War.
It's a sad movie. Yes. It's about war. It's about the horrors of war.
You know, what is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. All right, Steve. We can't keep doing this, Matt. Steve L says, I am not a big poetry fan, but two that evoke strong emotion from me are The Negro Speaks of Rivers, because as a white parent who adopted a black son, I've learned how ignorant and naive most white people, including myself, are about the true history of black culture. The poem invokes feelings of greatness, knowledge, and spiritual wealth in black history. The other is Our Greatest Fear by Marianne Williamson. I use this poem in teaching high school students. So many students have no clue how powerful and great they are and can become. And Steve, I think this was an email, so I can't say go to the subreddit and check out The Negro Speaks of Rivers, but I'm sure it's online somewhere if you want to look it up. I actually read this one from Steve's email. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful poem.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your contributions, everyone. This has given me a lot to dig into. I kind of want to like track all these down and collate them together and just enjoy a poetry deep dive.
Yeah. We've got poetry.
We've got poetry.
Our next show. I wouldn't want to do that because I would be terrible at it. But no, I really am enjoying spending time analyzing poems that we do for the show. And I really want to spend some time just making myself like poetry. I'll say that.
I agree.
But thank you, everyone, as Matt said, for submitting those. That was really great. Moving on to next week's question. Matt, even though we had a whole extra week, I really struggled with coming up with a question for this week. It's one of those weird readings where we have a lot of exposition and there's not a lot of questions that can be brought out of this very specific Dark Tower exposition. So I thought we'd have some fun with it this week because I was sick for like 4 days, and as part of my sickness, I did a lot of a thing I'm not usually used to, which is just laying around doing nothing. I'm a workaholic, Matt. I don't know if you knew that, and I need to be doing stuff constantly. So even when I'm sick, I try to entertain myself by watching stuff or reading stuff. And I was curious, the folks out there, do you have like a go-to standby thing you read or watch when you're sick and lay in bed, can't fall asleep, but you just need to put something on?
Yeah.
Is there a quicker way of saying that question so I can put it in the show notes?
Comfort media.
That's good.
Favorite comfort media.
Yeah.
But I think, maybe lean in the side of like when you are actually sick and you just need something where it's like, I just need the solace of this thing, Yeah.
I tend to not do as much sleeping as I should when I'm sick because I don't like medicine that makes me drowsy. I do not like it. I do not like the feeling of drowsiness. So even like when it's late at night, I will be taking Dayquil instead of NyQuil because I don't want to feel drowsy. So I tend to just be sitting up watching things more than I probably should. But so I do a lot of sick watching.
This is like the biggest difference between us that we've ever stumbled across.
I know.
I love that drowsy shit.
No, man. It makes me feel so like the feeling of like I have to go to sleep because I'm so tired is not a feeling that I enjoy in the slightest.
Well, you also drink coffee at like 8:00 p.m. So I think you and I have
true.
different metabolisms in some regard.
I think that's very true. But it should be a fun one. One of the things that made me think about is I think we talked about this when we reviewed the 1990s version of The Shining for other levels of the tower, because that was a miniseries that I was sick home from school one day and just said, I'm going to spend the entire fucking day watching the Stephen King adaptation of his book. And then I just remember finishing that day and being like, I wasted this whole fucking day. So let me know if your comfort watch is Stephen King's The Shining miniseries.
Yeah.
But that's going to do it for us here on Kingslingers. Next week, we continue with Black House. As we said, this is the, is it the penultimate episode? Yes, it will be the penultimate episode of the book, not counting our overall discussion. We will be reading and discussing chapters 22 through 25 of the novel.
Awesome. Yeah, remember you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit at r/doofmedia, as always, is a great place to answer the discussion question or just hang out.
Yep. If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you never miss an episode, especially when there aren't episodes. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much all those podcasting places.
Yeah, that's right. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. And because it's been 2 weeks, we have quite a list of new patrons this week. We have Shane L., Lucas M., Frank S., Adam S., and Tracy A. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over there. And, if we ever do miss another week, which will never happen, honestly, then you can just go check out our enormous backlog of other levels of the tower episodes.
Yeah. And we appreciate people, pledging and joining up even on the weeks that we're not releasing any episodes. That makes, I appreciate that y'all are sticking with us even on the weeks we drop the ball and get the COVID.
Me too.
Of course, if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is and always will be absolutely okay. It will always help us if you share this podcast, get the word out, let people know how amazing we are. And of course, you can always leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or where are the other places? I think Audible has them. And if the podcatcher you listen to has a review section, please type one up and leave it. This week's Spotlight review comes from Jeff B 1982, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Amazing podcast and Journey to the Tower. An amazing podcast. I found them when they were on the Drawing of the Three and stopped my own reread of the series till they caught up. It's so great hearing a long-time reader and a first-time reader go through the series, and now they're doing some of the connected books in season 2. It's great to read these books for the first time and hear them talk about it. Please keep this going for a long time." We'll do what we can, Jeff. Thank you so much for leaving that review.
I like to think that we've already been going for a long time. So we just need to go for a long time now.
Yeah, there you go. But as we now know, the tower will collapse on its own eventually. So we can't keep it up forever.
That's just such a depressing thought. Thanks.
Great thing to leave the episode on. Thank you guys so much, and thanks again for being patient with us over the last couple weeks. We will be back to our normal schedule next week as we read chapters 22 through 25 of Black House. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.